Chapter 4 Queen Guinevere. The most famous knights. Many knights joined King Arthur at Camelot. 3 of those knights, Sir Bedivere, Sir Lancelot du Lac, and Sir Gawain, would always be remembered. Sir Bedivere was the first and most faithful knight. Sir Lancelot du Lac was the bravest, the strongest, and the most handsome knight. And Sir Gawain was often called the greatest knight because Gawain was polite and chivalrous, and he did great deeds. As time passed, more knights came to Camelot. They too did many great and good deeds. All the knights sat in special seats at the round table. The seats were also called sieges. Each knight's name was written on their siege in letters of gold, but one seat at the table was always empty. There was no name written on it. The Siege Perilous. "The empty seat is called the Siege Perilous," said Merlin. "Only one man may sit in this place. The man will be pure, a man who has never done any evil deed. I do not know his name, but the man will come to Camelot one day. Meanwhile, no other man may sit on the Siege Perilous. If they do, they will die. Then great trouble will come to Logres." Leodogran, the king of Camelot. The knights of the Round Table travelled through all the land. There were no battles to fight now, but they fought other enemies, robbers, ogres, and evil magicians. Arthur's knights guarded and supported their king. They also protected the poor and weak. During this time, Arthur rode west with Sir Gawain and Merlin until they came to the land of Camelot. The king of Camelot was called Leodogran. Arthur, Merlin, and Gawain stopped at King Leodogran's castle. Leodogran welcomed them and took them into his hall. "You are welcome," he said. "Please eat, drink, and rest in my castle." King Leodogran was a tall man. He had a handsome and honest face, and he smiled often. His daughter came into the hall, and she smiled at the guests. "This is my daughter, Guinevere," said King Leodogran. Guinevere was tall, and her face was very beautiful. Her hair was the colour of gold. Men said that she was the fairest and most lovely woman in the land. She came into the hall and sat on the left side of her father. As soon as Arthur saw Guinevere, he looked at no one else. But Arthur did not behave like Uther Pendragon, his father. When Guinevere lowered her eyes, Arthur lowered his eyes too. King Leodogran looked at them both and smiled. Arthur spoke quietly to Merlin. "I want to marry," he said. "The kingdom of Logres must have both a king and a queen, and the kingdom must have an heir. I must have a son who will be king after me. I choose Guinevere to be my queen." Merlin looks into the future. Merlin looked at Arthur. The young king was tall and strong, and his hair was the colour of gold. Arthur had a handsome face and clear eyes. When people looked at him, they thought of a lion. The king's voice was soft, and when he spoke, men listened. Men loved Arthur because he was polite and honest and wise. They respected him because he was a great warrior and had won many battles. Arthur had brought peace to Logres. "Merlin," said Arthur, "can you look into the future? Use your magic and answer this question. Will my marriage to Guinevere bring peace and plenty to the land of Logres?" Merlin did not reply immediately. He looked far away towards the sea. His eyes were pale blue, the colour of the summer sky. Suddenly, the colour of his eyes changed. They became dark grey, the colour of the sky during a storm. There was sadness in Merlin's voice when he spoke. He said quietly, "Yes, Arthur, the land of Logres will know peace and plenty for a time. But all things must pass, and all men must pass with them. Your kingdom will live in memory. Your story will last as long as men tell stories. But you shall pass away, and I shall pass away, and your kingdom shall pass away." "This is the way of the world," said Arthur. "I shall marry Guinevere, and I shall love her and keep her, and I shall care for the land as long as I live." "Now I must tell you that I have looked into the future for the last time," said Merlin. "My powers are growing weak. My own future is dark, and soon I will pass away into the darkness. You will have to rule without my help. You are King Arthur, and your queen shall be Guinevere. Rule the land of Logres with justice. Make it a peaceful place." Arthur asks Guinevere to be his wife. Arthur went and spoke to King Leodogran. "I wish to marry your daughter," he said. Leodogran looked at his daughter Guinevere, and she smiled. "I am happy," said Leodogran. "You are a great king. It will be a good marriage. And I see that my daughter is happy too." And so the kings made an agreement. "I shall marry Guinevere in the spring," Arthur said to Leodogran. "Our wedding day will be on the holy festival which the English call Whitsun. And before that day I shall send my bravest knight to you. He will bring your daughter to Camelot. He will come to you in April at the holy festival of Easter." "We shall wait for him at Caelion Castle," Leodogran said. "Caelion stands beside the river Usk. It is my favourite castle. I will give Caelion Castle to you and to my daughter as a wedding gift." That night there was a great feast in the castle. Leodogran raised a cup and said, "Let us drink to the health of King Arthur and Queen Guinevere." And all the knights and people shouted, "Long live King Arthur and Queen Guinevere!" The Lady Nimue. Arthur left Camelot and rode with Merlin and Gawain to the southwest. Merlin led the way. At last they came to a land of lakes. "Why have we come this way?" asked Arthur. "Someone is waiting for me here," replied Merlin. "I do not know who the person is, but when I looked into the future, I saw this place." Nearby they heard the sound of people fighting. 2 knights were fighting beside the road. They fought with swords and shields. 2 squires held the knights' horses and watched the fight. A lady was standing between the 2 squires. "Sirs, why are you fighting?" Gawain called out to the knights. "We are fighting for the lady," one of the knights replied. "You may not have her." As he said this, the knight lifted his sword and ran towards Gawain. Gawain raised his shield and drew his own sword from its sheath. The knight swung his sword and brought it down onto the neck of Gawain's warhorse, cutting off the horse's head. The horse dropped, and Gawain was thrown to the ground. "Knight," shouted Gawain, "defend yourself!" He jumped up, raised his own sword, and ran towards the knight. The knight lifted his shield, but Gawain was too strong. His sword broke the knight's shield. Then Gawain swung his sword at the knight's helmet and broke open his head. The knight fell down and died. Then Gawain turned to the other knight, but the other did not wish to fight. "I was defending the lady from this man who is our enemy," the other knight said. "Her name is Lady Nimue of Avalon. She is waiting for a messenger from King Arthur's court." Arthur and Merlin rode their horses forward. Gawain took the dead knight's horse. "Who are you waiting for?" Arthur asked the lady. Lady Nimue smiled and said nothing. She looked at Merlin, and Merlin looked at Nimue. They said nothing, but Nimue and Merlin spoke to each other without words. Nimue was like Merlin. She had magical powers. She was a sorceress.